The journey of a grain of sand. A story that will change the way you look at life. There are lives that begin in absolute silence. No first cry. No one calling their name. Just existence. Quiet, fragile, in a vast, unknowing world. In that place where every speck of dust holds a universe, and every grain of sand carries an untold story. But then, one day, the universe calls, not gently, not kindly, but with the roar of fate, tearing through the calm, and thrusting us into a journey we never chose. A blazing red desert under the unforgiving sun. Vast, still, alone. In this place, time seems to forget to move. There are only grains of sand, lying motionless for thousands of years, witnessing radiant sunrises fade quietly into dusk. They do not complain. They do not long for more. They simply exist. Among billions of grains, there is one, small, almost invisible, no name, no striking shape. Just a tiny dot in the vast universe of sand, but within it, there stirs a faint awareness of life. It feels the scorching heat at noon, the piercing cold at night, and a deep bond with the grains around it. To this grain, the desert is everything. It is the world. It is eternity. It is home. Life drifts on, day after day. Peaceful to the point of monotony. Settled to the point of confinement. But buried deep within this grain of sand is a nameless curiosity, an unnamed yearning, a memory of something that has never been. And then it came, not with a whisper, but with the roar of a furious universe. A massive sandstorm, like a beast rising from the earth, erupted, howling, devouring everything. The sky turned blood red. The world spun into madness. Sand flew in every direction. No sense of where, no sense of when. A tiny grain of sand was lifted from the desert floor, without warning, spinning, crashing, falling helplessly into the void. Terror tore through its fragile form, ripping apart even the faith it once clung to. It was thrown out of the world it knew, into a place without a map, without a name. From being part of something vast and faceless, it became something small, alone, isolated, and thus began a journey, unwanted, unplanned. Only the wind remained, only the howling of chaos, only itself, bare, lost, adrift. When the storm had passed, when the chaos slowly settled, the grain of sand fell, but not back into the same old desert. It landed somewhere else, a place cool, flowing, alive, a river. For the very first time, it heard the murmur of water, saw sunlight scattering into tiny rainbows, felt the stream lift it, cradle it, carry it, gently yet irresistibly. And in that moment, it realized its life no longer belonged to itself. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to surrender, to flow, to let go, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. The stark contrast between the lifeless desert and this vibrant river awakened something deep inside that tiny mind. It was no longer a grain of sand from the desert. It had become a grain of sand on a journey full of danger, but also full of promise, a journey that only time could continue to write. Maybe each of us is a grain of sand too. The difference is, we get to choose how we tell our story. A story that may begin in the storm, but could end at the horizon. The rushing current wasn't just a path. It was the invisible hand of fate. It caressed and carved away each rough edge, teaching the grain of sand its first lessons. The strength and softness, the power of adaptation, and the quiet beauty of transformation. On the churning waters of the river, the tiny grain of sand began an entirely new life. A life of constant drifting, carried endlessly by the flow. At first, it was still haunted by the panic of the desert storm, a scar not yet healed. But little by little, in the river's eternal movement, it learned to adapt. No longer fighting the fierce current, it began to surrender. Floating, swirling with every ripple, every whirlpool, the water embraced its body, strangely unfamiliar yet tender. Like a mother's arms, at times a lullaby, at times a powerful pull. Like the call of destiny. In that surrender, the grain of sand felt a strange kind of freedom, a release from the suffocating stillness of the old desert. It began to open its eyes to this new underwater world. Stones and pebbles drifted alongside, each with a shape and a story uniquely sculpted by the river. They collided, brushed, and scraped, their sounds whispering like ancient tales, speaking of journeys with no final destination. It saw tiny river creatures, fish darting past like flashes of light, delicate strands of riverweed swaying like silent dancers. Everything moved in harmony with the flow. Not resisting, not fighting. From initial confusion came curiosity, then wonder. It wasn't just drifting anymore. It began to listen, observe, and feel. Every drop of water held a story. Every beam of sunlight piercing the surface felt like a gentle message from the sky. And in that moment, the grain of sand understood. The world was so much bigger than the dry desert it had known. And life was always present, no matter what form it took. But life on the river wasn't always gentle. There were sudden jolts, fleeting encounters, carrying the scent of soil, the voice of the forest and whispers of origin. A rotting piece of driftwood washed down from a distant forest. A freshly fallen leaf, still holding its final shade of green, a heavy stone. Weighed down with the burden of time, each collision was brief, but left a mark. Some left the grain of sand in pain. A kind of pain hard to describe, part physical, part a sharp ache in its fragile soul. The rough edges it carried, remnants of the desert, were slowly being worn away. At first, it recoiled, confused, afraid. But then it began to realize those very impacts were shaping it. Every fragment lost was a step toward growth. Sometimes, after a particularly hard hit, it felt oddly lighter, as if it had just let go of a heavy piece of its past. And in the rare moments of stillness, the grain of sand wondered. Was it being prepared for something greater? Was what it lost not really a loss at all, but a sign of becoming whole? Time passed, and along with the river, the grain of sand was no longer what it once was. From a rough, jagged speck, it had become smooth and round, like a tiny pearl, catching glimmers of sunlight dancing on the water. This wasn't just a change in shape, it was deep, irreversible transformation, a mark left by the journey of living. It understood, to move forward, we sometimes have to let go of the familiar, to become a better version of ourselves. Change was no longer something to fear, it was a sign of growth. The grain of sand embraced its new shape with quiet acceptance, and maybe, deep down, a little pride. It felt itself gliding more easily with the current, more in tune with the world around it. No more resistance, no more struggle, only rhythm and silent harmony. No more resistance, no more struggle, only rhythm and silent harmony. The river had taught it. Beauty isn't in remaining untouched, but in the transformation itself. In the scars that become marks of resilience and adaptability. And the grain of sand understood. It was ready for the next chapter. A bigger journey, a deeper one, beyond anything it had ever imagined. The journey down the river continued without pause, until one fateful moment. The current suddenly surged, no longer a familiar caress, but a massive pull, dragging the grain of sand at breakneck speed. Then, in an instant, everything opened up. The river dissolved into the ocean, like a gateway into an infinite world. Before the grain of sand lay a vast, endless expanse of deep blue, so overwhelming it felt as if it might dissolve into nothing. There were no more riverbanks, no more familiar pebbles. Just water, water, and more water stretching forever. Sunlight faded into a distant haze, as though it were slipping into a bottomless dream. The grain of sand felt smaller than ever. A speck within a cosmic sea, the ocean seemed like a living being, both nurturing and terrifying, both welcoming and testing. Caught in wild ocean currents, it was pulled under, pushed up, tossed without control or choice, only surrendering to the force of colossal waves. This was the ocean's first lesson. To survive, one must fully accept, fully let go, and simply exist within the unpredictable currents of life. In the depths of the ocean, the grain of sand was carried through dazzling realms it had never imagined. It passed by vibrant coral reefs, like underwater cities teeming with color and life, where tiny creatures hid and thrived. It danced with schools of shimmering fish, weaving perfect ballets beneath the waves. Strange sea creatures, like something from fairy tales, appeared and vanished in an instant, like fleeting dreams. The grain of sand witnessed the relentless cycle of life and death, harsh yet beautifully balanced. It saw intense chases where the strong devoured the weak, but also peaceful moments as sea life rested among swaying seaweed, as if meditating in the middle of chaos. Every ending led to a beginning. Nothing was wasted. Everything played a role in nature's exquisite balance. Awe and sorrow mixed within the grain of sand. It realized the fragile beauty of life. Wherever life existed, large or small, it mattered. Each life form added a brushstroke to the masterpiece the ocean painted anew each day. But the ocean wasn't only beauty and wonder. Eventually, the grain of sand faced its greatest challenges. Raging ocean storms, fiercer than any desert wind it had ever known. The sea roared. Waves rose like mountains and crashed down with fury. Creating deadly whirlpools, the grain of sand was thrown about, dragged to the ocean floor, into crushing darkness and pressure that felt like it could break everything. Old fears returned, the helplessness before nature's power. It felt like a paper boat in an angry sea, with nothing to hold on to, but this time, the grain of sand was different. After a long journey, it had resilience. Shaped by the river's long embrace, no longer panicked, it endured in silence, moving with the storm, even without knowing what lay ahead. Each storm became a test of courage, and with every storm survived, the grain of sand learned something new. As long as you're still here, you've already won. In the heart of the vast ocean, the grain of sand had to face inevitable loss. It saw friends, grains of sand it had once traveled with, swept away, vanishing into the deep, leaving no trace behind. It saw creatures die, sinking to the bottom, becoming part of the eternal layers of the sea. Sometimes it would suddenly recognize a grain it had once collided with in the river, now gone. Each time brought a quiet emptiness. But with the sorrow came understanding. Loss is a natural part of the journey. No one can hold on to everything. Life always walks hand in hand with death. Connection always comes with the risk of separation. The grain of sand learned to let go, not clinging to the past, not grieving for what had already slipped away. It learned to cherish each moment, because everything can disappear in an instant, and in that quiet acceptance, it found a deep and lasting peace. Amid the vast ocean, after countless storms and endless drifting, the grain of sand began to sense a subtle shift in the water. The currents were no longer rough or wild, but gentle, like the soft touch of a calming hand. The water was warmer now, no longer carrying the deep, bone-chilling cold of the ocean depths. Even the sound of the waves had changed. No longer a roar, but a tender hum, a soft invitation toward land. A deep sense of relief washed over the grain's tiny soul. It felt a glimmer of hope for a place to rest, for a home it hadn't known since leaving the desert. Peace was near, slow, steady, and unmistakable. And then, the moment arrived. Gentle waves carried the grain of sand onto shore. A smooth white beach beneath the warmth of the morning sun. For the first time in so long, it felt the solid ground beneath its tired body. The dry, comforting warmth after a lifetime in saltwater moved it beyond words. No more struggling, no more drifting. It had arrived. On that calm, sunlit beach, the tiny grain of sand became a quiet witness. It lay still under golden sunlight, listening to the whispering waves, and began to watch the daily life of the humans who passed by. Children played joyfully, laughing under the sun, building sandcastles only to destroy them moments later. Without hesitation, couples walked hand in hand, carving their names into the sand, then watching as the waves washed them away. A gentle reminder that love can be fragile, but moments of love are eternal. Families gathered together, their laughter and voices echoing with the heartbeat of the ocean. An old man sat silently, gazing toward the horizon, his eyes distant, as if speaking with a memory. The grain of sand watched in wonder, captivated by every expression, every feeling, every human gesture. It sensed joy, fleeting sadness, love, anger, and the quiet, carefree moments in between. It began to understand that humans, despite their complexity and vastness, were, at their core, just as delicate and real as it was. For the first time, it felt truly part of this world. Lying still among the sands, the grain watched footprints come and go, sandcastles rise and fall. It realized that nothing in life is permanent. Everything begins, everything ends. But the emotions felt in those fleeting moments, they were timeless. The grain began to understand the silent language of human emotion. It saw a tear fall from a mother's eye as she watched her child play, a tear filled with joy and quiet worry. It felt the regret in a man's gaze as he stared into the sunset, as though he were speaking to something lost. It heard the final sigh of a couple before they left the beach, a sigh full of contentment. The grain understood that people, like itself, were on their own journeys of change. They too endured collisions and loss. They too searched for meaning, and in that moment, a gentle empathy filled the grain's soul, a quiet connection to all the lives that had brushed past it. Lying silently on the beach, the grain of sand began to reflect on its long journey. From a nameless, coarse grain in the desert, it had faced violent storms, been shaped by rivers, and cast adrift in the cold depths of the sea. Each chapter was a challenge, but also a lesson. Now it understood. This journey, though not of its choosing, was what had shaped it. It wasn't just smoother on the outside, but its heart had opened to feel life, death, impermanence, and the quiet beauty of every passing moment. Every scar, every time it was worn down, was no longer a loss, but a vital part of its transformation. They had made it into a unique grain of sand, irreplaceable. The grain now knew, no matter how small, its existence held meaning. It was a part of something vast, a quiet witness to the fragile and wondrous beauty of life. And finally, it was at peace, no more longing, no more questions. Just the simple joy of being, a grain of sand resting on the shore, warm under the morning sun, listening to the waves, knowing it was exactly where it was meant to be. On the quiet shore, the once forgotten grain of sand had become inseparable from the place it now called home. It no longer feared being swept away. It no longer resisted change or disappearance. Instead, it learned to embrace each passing moment, to feel the warmth of the sun, the touch of a cool breeze, and the gentle rhythm of the waves. It no longer needed to be a towering mountain or a mighty river to feel whole, because within its smallness, it had found complete peace in simply being itself. Though it had no voice, its story was still being told in the quietest of ways. It spread through the murmur of the ocean, through the breeze that danced over the dunes, through the footprints that came and went. Its tale was not written in words, but in its very presence, in the journey it had taken, in what it had seen, felt, endured, and overcome. The grain of sand had become a silent symbol of resilience, acceptance, and deep understanding. It didn't need recognition. It didn't crave a name. And yet, it quietly touched every soul that ever stepped foot on that beach. Each castle built and crumbled, each footprint made and erased. The grain was there, a silent part of it all. Lying under the sun, it whispered. Every living being, no matter how small, carries a story. A journey, perhaps stormy, perhaps full of loss, but always rich with beauty and truth. It does not need to be remembered. It does not need to be celebrated. To live, to feel, to experience is already enough to make a life meaningful. Have you ever felt like you're just a tiny grain of sand in this vast world? Maybe you're lost in a barren desert of loneliness. Maybe you're being swept away in the river of life, where challenges crash down one after another, leaving you breathless. Or maybe you're battling storms that rise from the deep ocean called fate. But no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, please don't forget, your journey matters. And you are an irreplaceable part of this grand painting called life. Don't fear the changes. Don't shy away from the collisions. Because it's those very things that will shape you, strengthen you, teach you how to stand tall, how to live deeply. There will be moments when you feel completely out of place. Moments when you ask yourself, do I even matter in this giant world? But then, you'll come to see, just by being here, you are already a miracle. Live fully. Feel every moment, whether it's a small joy or a quiet sorrow. And believe this, your story, no matter how silent, is still a beautiful song, echoing softly through the silence. Because just like a grain of sand, you carry an entire universe within you. A universe of experience, of love, of things only you can share. So, don't rush. Don't underestimate yourself. Just keep going, even if it's slow, because you are the light in your own story. Thank you for listening to today's story. If something in it touched you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply send this video to someone who might need a little gentle light in the middle of life's storms.